How are you today? My name is Jeff Davis. I've been asked to talk to you today about a college class that I've attended regarding implicit bias and bias in general. So there were several questions that you asked that we addressed during this presentation. And the first one was describe the influence that race relations has on modern policing. I can tell you that recently in policing in general, that has been a topic that has been discussed over and over and over related to, we went through the area of the BLM movement and all the things that came out of that, and some of the protagonists in that movement that were not necessarily in law enforcement, but just in general, that kind of fueled that movement. And there are more events than there were people that fueled that movement. Regardless of how it happened, the result was a negative view of law enforcement across America related to bias and the way that law enforcement has been doing and is doing their job, and the perception that bias influences how that job is done. I think it's had a huge influence on what law enforcement agencies across America have done to attempt to alleviate that concern with their communities that there was bias that was involved. And I think one of the things that's very, very difficult to do is do a complete 180. The perception 3 years ago that there was bias in policing, and now all of a sudden, because you've mandated classes or you've done certain things, that all of a sudden that's gone. The same people are there in place. And I think that the perception goes down to the people, not necessarily the courses or what the department has done. The people on the street, the people in the community, don't always have contact with administration or city officials or county officials, depending on who you work for. The contacts they have are with the line officers, detectives that work the street. So their perception of the department may not be necessarily what the executive staff or the city leaders profess. It's going to be what they experience out there on the street. So the second question that was asked to address was, does bias exist within police community interactions? And explain your answer. I thought about this question whenever it was posed, and I thought, well, does it exist? Absolutely, it exists. In some places more than others. But I kind of try to think about the agency that I work for. Does bias exist? And the writing assignment that we did regarding the 4-minute video where the young man was sitting on a rock and the officer approached him as a suspicious person, that got me to thinking about, regardless of my feelings about where I think I'm at on bias, do I get placed in situations where that bias is weaponized and used as a tool, and law enforcement used as a tool to create a situation where bias is absolutely in play? And I think if you're really honest with yourself, you can't say that in law enforcement that doesn't happen. Those suspicious people calls happen very regularly, at least in my jurisdiction they do. And it's common to go out there and you see the person described. And what we don't do well enough is ask the extra questions. There's an upscale neighborhood in our area that we'll get calls that there's a Hispanic male sitting on a bench by himself. And before we would dispatch an officer that. Now we ask some extra questions. What is he doing wrong? What about him makes him suspicious? And some of those things are important, not just at the line level, but it's incumbent on the dispatchers and the call takers to ask those extra questions. And as an officer, when you get those calls, it's incumbent on you to make sure that you're not being used as a tool of bias against the people that you're contacting out on the street. So does it exist? Absolutely it exists. Are we always conscious that it's going on? No. But if we're going to be considered a professional organization, that's something that we need to be conscious of. We need to do a better job at. So number 3, what are some strategies that I'd like to see to implement in our community that would reduce the potential bias-related police-community interactions? I don't remember. I think it was a coach that said this to me once. It's very difficult to hate somebody that you're very, very close to. And when he said close, he was intending proximity. Is if you don't know or you don't understand something, it's very easy to dismiss it or draw a conclusion about that thing or person. In this case, I don't think we have, as law enforcement, when I'm saying law enforcement, I'm not talking about management, I'm talking about law enforcement, our interactions are generally related to enforcement actions in the community. There's not really a good way or a good mechanism in place where the community gets to know its officers. I've seen some agencies have done something I thought was pretty neat, is they put out like trading cards for players, and they would introduce the officer, they'd tell his specialties, what he likes, what he doesn't like, some really non-personal things, but personal things about that officer to kind of get you to know that, hey, that's a person, behind that badge, that's someone who does it. I think as law enforcement, we got to be a lot more intentional about going out and talking to people. Some of the things you look at on social media and you see a football being thrown and it's a police officer throwing a football and it's a kid catching it and they're playing catch. And there are some people that will comment, well, that's not his job. Why is he throwing a football while he's on shift? You know what? Maybe that is his job, to get to know the people that he's serving. The last one was, how has race and ethnicity and professional identity influenced my response to these questions? I'm going to tell you, when I first saw this assignment, I was like, I don't know that I can answer these questions and feel good about it. But you know what? I understand, because of this course, that it is something that we can talk about. It's something we can get better at, and it's something we should get better at. So I want to thank you for this course, and I want to thank you for the time that you put into developing this course, and tell you that I did learn something. And I want to thank you again.